Folks, we're ready to get ourselves underway one more time. This is lesson 12. I'll take our sign down here. You take your Bibles and turn with me, if you would, to 1 Samuel and chapter 12. 1 Samuel chapter 12. The end of our last lesson brought us up once again to the point where the second course of punishment was worthy of coming upon the nation. Our chart on the board here, I'm leaving the things on that have been on there for the previous lesson and also regarding that first course of punishment, and I'll have to remove them probably during this lesson here and kind of condense things down a bit because the board's not going to allow us to put everything in that needs to be in there. But once again, that first course of punishment we've surveyed in extremely basic form. Judges 1:1 through where we are right now in 1 Samuel. And when you get to the end of the 15th chapter there, the situation is ripe. And the contract, the provisions of the law contract, God is in a position where he has the right to start bringing the second course of punishment upon the nation Israel. They've gone through about a 450-year period of time in which they have failed to respond to the judgments and chastisements of that first course of punishment. And since they have not hearkened to him and been reformed by him through those things, he's in a position where he has the right to punish them 7 times more for their sins and begin to bring the judgments of that second course of punishment. He's in a position where he's able to bring upon them those climatic, I should say, alterations to their weather and everything, and make their heaven as iron and their earth as brass, and have them sow their seed in vain, and bring the famine situations and the trouble and distress and everything associated with that. And there's also political judgment there, of course, that he has the right to bring, and that'll become more apparent to you, and have a better appreciation for that as we move on and look at things in connection with that second course when it does come. But I had you turn to 1 Samuel chapter 12 here, because I wanted you to see in connection with them asking for a king to be made like unto the other nations, and the rejection of the theocracy there, and the abomination that thing was, and the great wickedness that that thing was. I want you to see something that Samuel did. The Lord had Samuel do, gave Israel a sign at this time that underscored the great wickedness, but it didn't simply underscore the great wickedness. It was a sign that involved the judgment upon their climate, upon their weather and everything, and it did it within a day's span of time. But it was a judgment that underscored the great wickedness that Samuel said and indicted the nation for producing when they asked for that king. But it was also a foretaste of what the second course of punishment called for. 1 Samuel chapter 12. And just note verse 13 for the context of what Samuel's saying. Now therefore, behold the king whom you have chosen, and whom you have desired. And behold, the Lord hath set a king over you. He's done what you said, what you wanted and everything. If you will fear the Lord and serve him and obey his voice and not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then shall both ye and also the king that reigneth of you continue following the Lord your God. But if ye will not obey the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then shall the hand of the Lord be against you as it was against your fathers. We told you last time at the end of the study that God injects that mercy principle one more time. Though the law contract doesn't contract for God, he injects that right that he's reserved to himself to be merciful and to show compassion and to be gracious to them. He does it again here when they ask for this king. And he did it by telling them what the king was going to be like. And the sorrow the king was going to bring upon them, and the failures the king was going to have. And he told them all that in advance before they convinced themselves, so to speak. He gave them a chance to think it over mercifully. And now even under that, even though they thought it over and said, we still want the king. God showed them the king, gave them a king after their own heart once again, Saul, who was head and shoulders above the rest and everything, brought the king before them, and he's going to give them a chance even under this king to perform that law contract. And he said, I'll do the good for you that the contract calls for if you perform under your king. But if you don't, the hand of the Lord will be against you as it was against your fathers. He's in the mercy principles there again. He's given them a chance even under this. He's demonstrating their impotency time and time again and everything. But when he mentions there the issue of the hand being against you as it was against your fathers, He wants them to understand that the hand of the Lord being against them as it was against their fathers, it would be against them in connection with the curses of that law contract. But it would also be against them in connection with bringing that next course of punishment. The first course and its problems would still be there. You understand, once again, the fact that each course builds upon the previous one. So they still be having the same problems their fathers had, but they even have some more problems. And a sign is given, like I said, that underscores that to the people, underscores the great wickedness in what they've done asking for a king, and underscoring what the hand of the Lord against them will amount to if they fail under this king. Verse 16. Now therefore stand and see this great thing which the Lord will do before your eyes. Is it not wheat harvest today? I will call unto the Lord, and he shall send thunder and rain, that ye may perceive and see that your wickedness is great, which ye have done in the sight of the Lord in asking you a king. So Samuel called unto the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day, and all the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. Now it's very interesting. It's very interesting once again that Samuel would demonstrate and then give the sign once again, demonstrates the great wickedness, and that would be underscored in their hearts to underscore the reality of the Lord having his hand against them if they don't perform, and that actually mercifully giving him an opportunity to perform. They wanted it that way, he'll give it to them that way. But there's more to it also than that, because this great thing which the Lord is doing, really when you look at it and everything, it matches up with what that second course of punishment calls for, or one of the things the second course of punishment calls for. The second course, once again, the climatic changes and the issue of the famine and all that business, and making it so that the weather doesn't cooperate, so they don't have the former and the latter rains and everything, and so the harvest doesn't bring forth. The first course of punishment had the enemies spoiling their harvest, but the land and everything was still producing. Second course of punishment, one of the aspects of it calls for the land to be affected by the weather especially, so it doesn't bring forth. Well, it's harvest, wheat harvest today, isn't it? Samuel says everything's gone great up until now, hasn't it? The enemies haven't come in and taken it. You're going to go out there and harvest. You haven't sowed your seed in vain. But look what the Lord's going to do. I will call unto the Lord, he shall send thunder and rain. That's going to cause a problem with the harvest, isn't it? The climate's not going to work like it accommodating the harvest. It's going to work against it. That's a sign, folks, of the second course of punishment. And that's really what the great wickedness has merited. But the mercy's been injected once again, and they don't get that right away. But if they don't perform under this king, that's what they're ripe for. That's what they're worthy of. And we ended up talking last time about how that when you go on and read from chapter 13 and following, all you read is Saul's failure. A few stays of that, but the general flow of things is his failure. And he refuses to obey the Lord. He's even presumptive enough to take upon himself the office of a priest. And the nation therefore at the end of chapter 15 puts themselves in the position of worthiness to receive that second course of punishment. Now, we come to an issue here now. I keep on saying they're worthy to receive it. And the diagram up here, once again, gives you the parameters of that first course of punishment, Judges 1 through 1 Samuel 15:35, the end of chapter 15 there. And if it wasn't for what you just learned in the last lesson about the issue of God reserving himself the right to act mercifully with his people in spite of that law contract. He's not going to set aside that law contract, and he can't not go ahead and give them what the course is called for, because that's what the thing calls for. Now it's an agreement once again. But he's got the right to temper it and to administer it in a manner that's fully compatible with all the goodness that makes up his character. And he's demonstrated that throughout the first course by raising up the judges. He demonstrates that in what we just saw here with Saul. But he's going to demonstrate that in an unheard of manner right now at the beginning of 1 Samuel 16, when the second course of punishment is deserved to come upon the nation, he doesn't bring it right away. And in not bringing it right away, he doesn't only not bring it right away, but he even reverses the first course of punishment, stops it from taking place any longer, and he brings in what I call an interlude of glorious blessing upon his nation, totally undeserved, totally unmerited. But he brings it in for a purpose, a special purpose that he has, that Israel needed to understand at that time, and is critical to your understanding and mine when it comes to appreciating the outworking of God's purpose with the nation Israel. When you begin to read, if you haven't done it already, when you begin to read from 1 Samuel 16 and on, it becomes apparent to you that the second course of punishment doesn't come yet. In fact, you don't get the second course of punishment until 1 Kings chapter 12. From 1 Samuel 16 to 1 Kings chapter 12, though the second course of punishment is deserved and you expect it to be there, you don't see it there. And it doesn't come until after Solomon has died. Now, let me alter our board here a little bit. Let me just get rid of the issue of the judges there and the worthiness for the second course. And let me remove the parameters there for this first course. We'll leave the number up there, though. That's the first course has come upon the nation there. And you know the parameters for that now. And we'll just leave it there like that. All right? The second course is worthy to come there at the end of 1 Samuel 15. But now, what you're going to have from 1 Samuel 15, I'll just illustrate this way until we get back on track here. And I'll put a 2 in there to illustrate what's coming up, and that'll be our next lesson. We'll focus upon the second course of punishment. What we're going to try and do, by the way, folks, from this point on, this lesson will focus upon this interlude of glorious blessing. Then the next lesson will deal with the second course of punishment. We'll take a lesson per course till we get to the beginning of the fifth course of punishment. And so that's the most important course of all, and the lengthiest, and the one that involves the most matters to it. The rest of our study, of course, will be dealing with the fifth course, and then the last lesson will focus upon the establishment of the kingdom itself out there. But right now, just illustrating the board here, that's what's going to be going on. The second course will come, then the third, and so forth there. First course, Judges 1 through 1 Samuel 15:35. And then you got this interlude now of glorious blessing. And the parameters for that are 1 Samuel 16 all the way through to 1 Kings 12. To the beginning of 1 Kings 12 there. Let's put it that. We can modify that a little bit if we need to when we get over there. But for simplicity's sake, let's just state it that way for now. 1 Samuel 16 to 1 Kings 12, you expect the second course of punishment according to the contract, but you don't get that because of a magnificent intervention of God's mercy, an injection of His mercy based upon the reservation principle He has. I'll be merciful to whom I will be merciful, and compassionate to whom I will be compassionate. He interjects that for a span of about 100 years. But its importance, it far exceeds its length of time. One way you know that is by looking how much doctrinal space God gives to it. Look at how much doctrinal space you have from 1 Samuel 16 to 1 Kings chapter 12. You go through the rest of 1 Samuel, all of 2 Samuel, and the first 11 chapters of 1 Kings. And the doctrinal space there exceeds what he took to record for you the 450 years under the first course of punishment. He's telling you something there, folks. He's telling you that what he's doing in this interlude of mercy and grace and glorious blessing is critical to understand. It's vital to understand. And it's a big issue in his dealings with Israel. And you get so much graphic detail given you concerning David's life and his ministry and everything. And the same applies to Solomon. And this issue itself is another study that ought to have at least 10 to 15 hours dedicated to it. And that's about what we've dedicated to it in our more exhaustive study, which tapes once again are available to you if you want them. But in this study, all that's being reduced and condensed into just one lesson. And all we're going to do is simply talk about the parameters of it, a few of the things that take place in it, and look at the central issue, which is the indispensable issue that you've got to understand in order to appreciate it and be able to appreciate the rest of the outworking of God's purpose with Israel. But the first thing to recognize and to acknowledge is that that's what you got now. From 1 Samuel 16 to 1 Kings 12 is not the second course of punishment as contracted for and expected, but an interlude of glorious blessing mercifully given to the nation, graciously given to the nation. And it is glorious blessing. Historians quite often call David's reign, and especially Solomon's reign, as Israel's golden age. And it stands in stark contrast to what they've just gone through from the judges' time on, and it stands in stark contrast to what they have had since that time. And the only way it's ever eclipsed is when the kingdom out there is established. It is a time of glorious blessing. Now, there are three things that make it up. Three aspects of glory that make it up. There's an expression you read throughout David's reign and Solomon's reign. That's the issue of God, general rest that God gave to Israel from all their enemies round about them. Now, they had rest at times under the judges there for a certain period of time while the judges reigned. But there's a general rest that prevails, and a satisfied rest that prevails for the nation throughout David and Solomon's reign. And that's one of the aspects of glorious blessing that Israel has. The second aspect is a righteous rule and leadership which pulls Israel out of their spiritual corruption and the vileness of their apostasies. It doesn't simply put those things on hold and stop, but there's actual reversal that takes place under David and Solomon, and a righteousness rules in Israel. And that's one of the aspects of glorious blessing that takes place during this time right there. And the third aspect is great national prosperity. There's great prosperity for the people and for the nation as a whole. And it's not only from within their own nation. It's also something that is given to them by the nations around them. And you read about those, especially in Solomon's reign there, the gifts that were given to him, and the benefits that were bestowed upon his people by nations out there that were responding to his glory and to the glory of the nation as a whole. Well, it's a time, once again, and it needs to be understood as an interlude. And I want to emphasize that to you before we go on any further. It doesn't last very long. Well, 100 years is a pretty long time for us. But when you look at it in the scope of the nation's existence and everything, that's not a very long time. That's less than 1/4 of the time they were under the first course of punishment. So it needs to be understood as an interlude of glorious blessing given to the nation there. And it only lasts about that long, and following the death of Solomon, Israel is plunged back into apostasy, and the second course of punishment comes, and the first course is resumed, and the second course is added on top of it, and from that point on, it's one quick downhill slide through the third course, fourth course, and the commencement of the fifth course, and Israel's been under that thing since it began, the fifth course, and will still be under it out there in the day of the Lord's wrath. That's an interlude, therefore, of glorious blessing. Now, I want to take a few minutes here and You're going to have to go over the details of all this, of course, and hopefully you will. But I want to take a few minutes here now and talk about the three main reasons that there are. There's three major issues that make up the glorious blessing. There's three main reasons for why God brought it in. And the third one is the most important of all. And that's the one we'll spend the rest of our time dealing with. But the first main reason why God brought in the glorious interlude of blessing is because of I will be merciful to whom I will be merciful, and I'll be compassionate to whom I will be compassionate, because of the glory of his own name. And you don't need to go over that, and I don't need to review that with you. The last lesson once again focused on that, though as brief as it was, but that issue once again of God being merciful and gracious and long-suffering and full of goodness and truth, because of who and what he is. That's a reason for why this interlude of blessing ever came in the first place, because of the glory of his own name. Second reason for why this interlude of glorious blessing and everything came upon the nation has to do with giving Israel a foretaste of what his Jehovah-ness and grace will give them when they learn the lesson that that's the only way they can ever be what his plan and purpose calls for. Now, there's something to this that we haven't said anything about. And you hear me say that? I don't know how many times you heard me say that. That there's things we just had to skip over and couldn't deal with. The truth of the matter is, folks, under that first course of punishment, and not really only under that, but everything Israel's gone through from the moment God educated them in his Jehovah's and grace through to the end of that first course of punishment, Israel has really had it manifested to them all the details regarding what they need God to be in order for them to be what his plan and purpose calls for. The whole issue of God's Jehovah-ness, I will be blank. I am blank. I'll be blank. Whatever you need me to be, fill in the blank. All the 7 things Israel needs him to be, of course, are listed in those 7 Jehovah names. And God, throughout his dealings with Israel, doctrinally communicates and teaches them the meaning of each one of those names. But the truth of the matter is, all 7 of those names and the 5 ones that make up the core have been taught to the nation. They've had to demonstrate that's what they need him to be in everything they've gone through that first course of punishment. I'll give you an example of that. They need God to be a redeemer. They're in a predicament with their sins, their own sinful nature that they can't do anything about. They need a redeemer for the predicament of their sins and the debt of their sins. That's something that God was demonstrating to Israel right from the beginning, way back before they even signed that law contract. But it's something that has gone through everything they've been going through and has been especially manifest throughout coming out of that first course of punishment, the fact that they couldn't reverse the results. They couldn't forestall the second course coming. They couldn't cease from their own stubborn ways. They couldn't change their heart. They saw that they should have seen the need to have to cast themselves upon God's Jehovah-ness, and they needed him to do something about their own stubborn ways, their own sinful heart. They needed a redeemer. Well, folks, that's why the book of Ruth is sitting where it is. The book of Ruth is a focus on the doctrine of redemption. And it sits at the end of the book of Judges. Because if nothing else has been manifested by what Israel went through under the first course of punishment, it was a need for a redeemer. And the book of Ruth, through Boaz, illustrates the issue of redemption. And you got the whole doctrine of redemption sitting back in the law, exposed there and doctrinally manifested. The mechanics of it all and everything, the requirement of the Redeemer, and things along those lines. And the book of Ruth ends with a genealogy that puts Ruth into Boaz's line there, and the bringing forth of a son whose name is David. And you're supposed to follow that doctrine down to this man David, and you're going to see some things there. Well, what I'm after saying that to you, That's just one example. That's just one of the 5 core issues of those 7 Jehovah names and 7 Jehovah issues that Israel needs God to be for them. But what I'm saying to you is the other 4 core elements are sitting also there. Israel needs God to be a redeemer, a deliverer, an avenger, a king, and a blesser. You saw the king issue there when they rejected God from being their king and chose Samuel. But the demonstration of Saul was they needed God to be their king. All those issues, all those 5 core issues, with their matching 5 Jehovah names, and the other 2 also, they have to do with the shepherd and the presence of God amongst them. Those have all been demonstrated to Israel that they needed to be those things for them by the time you come to 1 Samuel 16. Now, one of the reasons why God brings this interlude of glorious blessing in is because he manifests to the nation what he, by his Jehovahness, doing for them what they need him to do, as he's just demonstrated that they need him to do for them. He brings us in this interlude of glorious blessing and demonstrates to him what they will be on the receiving end of when he puts his Jehovahness into effect for them. And what will be in store for them will be unparalleled glorious blessings. He gives them a foretaste there for that kingdom out there. Is what he does. He gives them a foretaste of what it's going to be like when he's reigning and ruling on this earth in them, fulfilling the plan and purpose he has with them, and they are blessed magnificently. And they are the head of the nations, and they eat the riches of the Gentiles, and in their glory they boast themselves, like Isaiah 60:61 talks about. He gives them a foretaste of that, and he gives them a foretaste of righteousness ruling in them, and making an impact upon the nations out there, according to his plan and purpose for them. But he gives them a foretaste of all that, based upon having clearly demonstrated to them that everything that they need his Jehovahness to click in for them, and all the needs that they have, his Jehovahness will meet. And he gives them a foretaste now of when he meets it. This is what they'll have. That's the second reason for giving this interlude of glorious blessing. The third reason, the most important, is actually something that comes out of that second reason. Since it's his Jehovahness and grace that they need, since the only hope they ever have of being what his plan and purpose calls for is by his Jehovahness being before them what they need him to be, during this interlude of glorious blessing, God makes a covenant with David through which he spells out the mechanics by which that Jehovahness will be put into effect. And that's the most important reason for this interlude of glorious blessing. The central issue in it all, the central issue in 1 Samuel 16 to 1 Kings 11 is 2 Samuel chapter 7. And 2 Samuel chapter 7 is the details of the making of the Davidic covenant. God makes a covenant with David in which he declares the mechanics by which his Jehovahness will be put into effect. And everything that goes on in this glorious interlude of blessing, or interlude of glorious blessing, revolves around 2 Samuel 7, revolves around that Davidic covenant. And everything focuses upon it. And the one indispensable thing for you to understand about this interlude of glorious blessing is 2 Samuel chapter 7. And therefore, all I'm going to say about this is what has been said so far. And now, for the remainder of our study time in this hour, we're going to look at that Davidic covenant. And all we're going to do is survey it. But it's the issue. And you need to understand it and gain some appreciation for it. So come over here now with me, if you would, to 2 Samuel and chapter 7. 2 Samuel chapter 7. Now, the Davidic covenant, what you got here in 2 Samuel 7 is just like I said a few moments ago. You got the historical account of God making this covenant with David. Now you need to understand something as you go through 2 Samuel 7. You do not have a doctrinal exposition on what the covenant's all about. Now I don't mean to imply that you got the statement about the covenant here and you can't understand anything about it. You can understand the general gist of what is covenanted for. But God has left it up to David, as the prophet he made him to be, to expound what the covenant's all about. And that's why it's referred to so many times in the book of the Psalms. He also utilized other prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Hosea, Micah, and others to give details, doctrinal details, explaining aspects and features of the covenant. What we're going to do here, therefore, is take a quick look in 2 Samuel 7 at the issue of the covenant and the general gist feature that's involved in it. And then we're going to go to a couple of passages. That's probably all the time we'll have. But I'll take you to the two most important passages there are when it comes to understanding this covenant. And what you'll see is the very thing I just mentioned to you in describing it to you. There's a covenant by which God covenants to put his Jehovah's grace into effect and declares the mechanics by which it will be done. Now, there's a covenant God already made back in Deuteronomy 29, that additional covenant to the law covenant that sits outside that coffin of the ark, commonly called the Palestinian covenant. We went over that once again. You saw that was a covenant in which God contracted to put his Jehovah's grace into effect for Israel, and contracted and swore to them that the course of punishment underneath that law contract would not be their eternal lot. But in that Jehovah's contract of Deuteronomy 29, you still don't have the mechanics by which his Jehovah's grace is going to be put into effect. You simply got him swearing the fact that it will be put into effect. But you don't have the mechanics of how it's going to be done. You don't have how it is he's going to be their Redeemer. You don't have how it is he's going to be their conquering hero. You don't have how it is he's going to be the things they need him to be. You simply got the statement that he will do it. And he swears to do it. But you don't know how it's going to be done. The Davidic covenant is the how. The Davidic covenant is the mechanics. They've just learned by going through the first course of punishment that they need a Redeemer. They need an Avenger. They need a Deliverer. They need a King. They need a Blesser. Now the Davidic covenant comes along and says, here's how I'm going to be your Redeemer, your Deliverer, your Avenger, your King, and your Blesser, and also your Shepherd, and how it is I'm going to actually dwell in your presence forever. And the how is by God telling David, I'm going to make you a house for me. And I'm going to come and reside and dwell in your line. I'm going to incarnate myself or enflesh myself in your seed and become a member of your nation in your seed. 2 Samuel chapter 7. Now we won't go over the setting behind it and everything. The Lord's desire to build, David's desire to build the Lord a house, a dwelling place and everything. You can read all that yourself. And the more you read about it, the more you appreciate it, the more everything we're talking about fits in, and you see the sense of it all and everything along those lines. David desires, though, to build the Lord a house, as it says there. Nathan comes along and tells him, go ahead. In verse 4, and it came to pass that night that the word of the Lord came to Nathan, saying, go and tell my servant David, thus saith the Lord, shalt thou build me an house for me to dwell in? Whereas I have not dwelt in any house since the time that I brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, even to this day, but have walked in a tent and in a tabernacle. In all the places wherein I have walked with all the children of Israel, spake I a word with any of the tribes of Israel, whom I commanded to feed my people Israel, saying, why build ye not me an house of cedar? Now therefore, there's a mild reproof, of course, and rebuke given to David there in connection with that. There's really, David's intention, I guess you might say, is good. But the reality of the thing is, David sees the rest being given, everything, and the beginning of the glorious blessings on the way, that there's no reason why we can't build that permanent house, Lord, and you come and dwell in us and give us that kingdom right now. Well, there was a problem with that, but David's heart was in the right place, so to speak, as far as desire goes, but the timing was off. And the Lord gives him a mild reproof here in connection with that. Now therefore, verse 8, so shalt thou say unto my servant David, thus saith the Lord of hosts, I took thee from the sheepcote, from following the sheep, to be a ruler over my people, over Israel. And I was with thee whithersoever thou wentest, and have cut off all thine enemies out of thy sight, and made thee a great name, like unto the name of the great men that are in the earth. And there is a kingdom on here, David, you're right in all that, but I'm doing this with you. And what I need you to understand, David, is I'm doing this with you for a purpose. You're right in seeing almost a foretaste of the kingdom here and everything. You're right in all that. But you're missing something else. You understand something else yet. Now you understand it. Moreover, in verse 9, verse 10, moreover, on top of what I've done for you already, this is what you need to understand. Moreover, I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them, that they may dwell in a place of their own, and move no more. Neither shall the children of wickedness afflict them any more as before time. And as he said, goes on in verse 11, it said, and as since the time that I commanded judges to be over my people Israel, and have caused thee to rest from all thine enemies. You're right, David, once again, is seeing a foretaste concept, and by coming along and telling you, don't build me the house right now, I'm not coming along and saying that's not coming out there. It is. I will do all that. But the issue is I will do it. It's a future issue. It's not the issue for right now. There's something else is the issue for right now. I've given you rest from your enemies. I've made you ruler of my people. And I'm giving these glorious blessings right now. And I've done something different from what's been going on since the days of the judges and everything, when the first course of punishment was in effect. And I'm doing it for another reason than you think. Something that you haven't delved into in connection with my counsel yet. Nor could David, of course. But now that opening of the Lord's counsel is being given to David. And look at it at the end of verse 11. Also the Lord telleth thee that he will make thee an house. And when thy days be fulfilled, and thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, I will set up thy seed after thee, which shall proceed out of thy bowels, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. And I will be his father, he shall be my son. If he commit iniquity, I will chasten him with a rod of iron, and with the stripes of the children of men. But my mercy shall not depart away from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away from before thee. And thine house and thy kingdom shall be established forever before thee. Thy throne shall be established forever. According to all these words and according to all this vision, so did Nathan speak unto David. Now, the critical issue to understand there, and the thing we're going to focus upon is the end of verse 11. Also the Lord telleth thee that he will make thee an house. Now, when the Lord says that, he's not talking about building David a house of cedar. David's already got a house, a physical place to dwell in. But the Lord's taken that concept of a house once again that David wanted to build for the Lord, a place for the Lord to reside. And the Lord's coming along and telling him that place is coming, David. And that there's going to be that house out there when he establishes that kingdom and plants Israel forever in a land out of which they never moved. In their land out of which they never moved there. And the Lord will dwell in a physical house at that time. And the glory of that house and everything is going to be typified by the house that Solomon's going to build. And it's graphically described for in Ezekiel 40 through 48. That millennial temple and everything. That temple is going to be out there. But the Lord takes that dwelling place for himself concept, and he tells David, I'm going to make of thee an house. Now the issue, he doesn't come along and say, I'm going to build you a house. I'm going to make of thee a house. You're going to be my house, David. That's the issue here. You're going to be my house. I'm going to dwell in you. What he's talking about here, now that's the issue. The explanation of that isn't given to you here. The doctrinal exposition that comes along and describes all that to you. The Lord lets David do that himself. David's a prophet. He's not only raised up as ruler of the people, God makes him a prophet. And from this point on especially, not exclusive to this point on, but from this point on especially, God's use of David as a prophet comes along and sets forth the means by which that thing's going to be done, and extols the greatness of it and the grandeur of it and everything. But the issue is, God makes of David a house for himself, and he's going to come and dwell in the line of David. He's going to take up residence in David's fleshly line and become a seed of David. He's going to become a man. He's going to become an Israelite of the tribe of Judah, of the seed of David. And that's the means by which his Jehovah-ness is going to mechanically be put into effect. That's the mechanics of it. That's how he's going to be their Redeemer, their Deliverer, their Avenger, their King, and their Blesser. Coming now to the 132nd Psalm. Two passages, 132nd Psalm first, Isaiah chapter 9 next. 132nd Psalm. This is one of the passages we could look at in the book of the Psalms here. Now others we could look at. 132nd Psalm. And pick it up here. Well, it would be great to do the whole Psalm, but we just haven't got time for that. Pick it up here in verse 11. The Lord hath sworn in truth unto David. He will not turn from it. Of the fruit of thy body will I set upon thy throne. Now here's one of the passages that's giving you a doctrinal exposition of 2 Samuel 7, what God swore to David. When David counseled with the Lord about this issue, and the Lord talked to David about the issue, and the Lord gave David insight and perception into the issue. These type things were said. The Lord swore in truth and said to him, of the fruit of thy body will I set upon thy throne. He set up a throne once again for David, and an everlasting kingdom concept there in Israel. And he set up the fact that in that line, David, of your seed that'll come along, one time in that seed I'll take up residence. And I'm the king of Israel. Israel needs me as their king. You're a type of me. Your son Solomon's a type of me. And in that line I'll come, and I'll sit upon your throne. And the issue of Israel needing me as their king, their righteous king sitting upon the throne that you're the type of, the mechanics by which that'll take place will be by me coming and fleshing myself in your line. When he says there, of the fruit of thy body will I set upon thy throne, it's not simply the fruit of your body, I'm going to take the fruit of your body and keep it on your throne there. But the issue is, of the fruit of your body will I set upon thy throne. I'm going to come and become part of the fruit of your body and sit upon your throne. Now you see that real clear over in Isaiah chapter 9. Come with me to Isaiah chapter 9, passage you know well. Quoted every time at Christmas season. And rightfully so, if you're going to talk about and think about the birth of the Lord Jesus Christ. All the time of the year is wrong, but if you're going to talk about and think about and everything like that, passage like this ought to be gone over. Because it's talking about the child born, the son given and everything, Adonai Jehovah and fleshing himself in the line of the seed of David. Now I want you to see that with me. I want you to see more to it than just that. Isaiah chapter 9. This is a marvelous passage, by the way, because it's talked about in the context of the fifth course of punishment. And it's talked about as the means by which deliverance will be received by Israel from that fifth course of punishment, which of course is from all the courses, because the fifth is built upon the previous four. The means by which they're going to have any deliverance is because of verse 6. Starts off with the word for, your particle of explanation. The reason why they're going to get the deliverance spoken about in the first 5 verses, because for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. That's the first part there is what the Davidic covenant contracts for. That's 2 Samuel 7, that verse we read. I'll make of thee a house. A child's going to be born, but a son's going to be given. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders. He's going to sit upon David's throne. He's going to take the reign. He's going to be the king. And his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end. Upon the throne of David and upon his king to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice forever, from henceforth even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. Now you see, that's talking about the Messiah there. It's talking about the Lord Jesus Christ. That's what the Davidic covenant is talking about. The Davidic covenant is the contract in which God contracts to enflesh himself in the line of the seed of David. That's the Messiah. Adonai Jehovah enfleshing himself in David's line. The Messiah is Adonai Jehovah in human flesh, David's flesh. He's the child born, he's the son given. And the political situation, once again, the national entity and welfare and everything is in view of that. Of the increase of his government, verse 7 says, and peace there shall be no end. Upon the throne of David and upon his king to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice, even for henceforth, even forever. That's that kingdom out there once again. That's the fulfillment of the Abrahamic covenant out there. And the political means by which that thing is settled and established. Look though first of all now in connection with that at the end of verse 7. It says, the zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. Capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, Jehovah of hosts. It's the zeal of Jehovah that performs this. It's God's Jehovahness performing it. It's God's Jehovahness mechanically put into effect for Israel. And through the son, child born, the son given, through the Adonai Jehovah enfleshing himself in the line of seed of David, those 5 core Jehovah elements are accomplished, performed for Israel. That's what those 5 names in verse 6 are all about. We've talked about it already. From the lessons learned once again back there in Exodus chapter 15 through 18. From the time the lessons began to be taught concerning God's Jehovahness for Israel, the I am blank. From the time that began to be taught up until you come to the end of 1 Samuel 15 and the worthiness of the second course coming upon Israel, all of those 5 core Jehovah issues have been manifested to Israel as something they need God to do for them. The issue of, they need the issue of the Redeemer. This may go off the board here down the bottom, I'm not too sure. They need the Redeemer. They need the Deliverer. They need him to be their avenger and deal with the satanic policy of evil and so forth. They need him to be their king, and they need him to be their blesser. Then all they can have a merit under that law contract is the curse. They can't even get an inkling of a blessing, so to speak. They need God to do all those things for them. They need the Redeemer, the Deliverer, the Avenger, the King, and the Blesser. Those 5 names you've got there in verse 6 match up with those 5 things right there. As the Redeemer, I'm just going to take the first letter of each one. The capital. By the way, notice they're capitalized in your King James Version. They're proper names. He's going to be called these things. Notice he's not called those things now. The Lord wasn't called those things when he was here. He'll be called those things when he mechanically performs all those things for them. The history of his mechanical performance of those things, at the cross, he's their Redeemer. Out here during the day of the Lord, he's their deliverer and he's their avenger. When he sets up the kingdom, he's their king, and throughout its duration, he's their blesser. He's the Redeemer, our Redeemer, Deliverer, Avenger, King, and Blesser. By the way, folks, that's what the day of the Lord's all about. The day of the Lord's wrath there is his deliverance of Israel and his avengement of his cause with them. The kingdom is his kingship and his blessing, and the whole thing is based upon his redemption. But Israel needs those 5 things. They need Jehovah to do those 5 things for them. And they're going to call him names that correspond with each one of those things out there in the kingdom when those things have been performed. They're going to call him Wonderful in view of his redemption. They're going to call him Counselor in view of his deliverance. They're going to call him the Mighty God in view of his avengement of them. They're going to call him the Everlasting Father in view of his blessing, and they're going to call him the Prince of Peace in view of his kingship. Now I just say that to you. Before you ever would have gotten to Isaiah chapter 9 and verse 6, doctrinally, God would have had you go through the book of the Psalms. And the way in which you learn those 5 names in the book of the Psalms. You may have noticed that the book of the Psalms is actually broken down into 5 sections. Psalm 1 through 41, section 1. Psalm 42 through 72, section 2. Psalm 73 through 89, section 3. Psalm 90 through 106, section 4. Psalm 107 through 150, section 5. That's not just there for the fun of it, folks. The 5 books that make up the book of the Psalms David compiled those things, or set the outline for them anyway. And they are doctrinal exposition on the Davidic covenant and its ramifications to Israel in the outworking of God's plan and purpose with them. And each one of those books takes each one of those 5 core elements of God's Jehovahness. The first book is the Redeemer. The second book is the Deliverer. The third book is the Avenger. The fourth book is the King. And the fifth book is the Blesser. And you'll learn in those 5 books the Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Prince of Peace, Everlasting Father issue. And you'll learn to see the outworking of the Davidic covenant producing that. You're going to see the Messiah in all those ways. And so when you come to Isaiah, you've already learned all that. A biblical theology would have you learning all that. A systematic theology turns all that around, whips it all up, and makes a mess out of it. But a biblical theology, you study the book in the order in which God wrote it and everything, and you learn things in the way, and let God teach you the things in the way in which He wants you to learn them. You learn if we ever get to Isaiah. Israel's supposed to learn before it ever gets to Isaiah. You are supposed to learn before we ever get to Isaiah. I'm just giving the result of it here in verse 6. But that's what you got. The Davidic covenant. The reason for the child born, the son given, is to put God's Jehovahness mechanically into effect for Israel. And He's the child born, the son given to be the Redeemer. He enfleshes Himself to fulfill Jehovah Jireh. The Lord Himself will provide Himself for the sacrifice. And He puts the Jehovah Nissi concept and all the other ones into effect. And the Jehovah Shalom concept. And the Jehovah Zidkenu concept. And the Jehovah Shema concept into effect out there. He puts them all into effect. He takes care of the remnant in a very special way with Jehovah Ruah. The Lord is my shepherd issue there during that time. That's a remnant concept. The 23rd Psalm, by the way, folks, is a psalm of the remnant of Israel in the tribulation period. It's not a psalm to be stuck on the back of funeral announcements. It's a psalm for the remnant of Israel in the tribulation period. The psalm is broken down to two parts, and it deals with the day of the Lord out there is a 7-year period of time on Daniel's time scale. It has two parts to it, a 3.5 and a 3.5. And that psalm is broken down to those two parts. And it deals with the remnant that goes to the first and the second part of that thing. And it calls upon them to be acknowledging and appreciating and singing about God's Jehovah. Every one of the 5 core Jehovah names are sitting in that psalm, beginning with Jehovah Ruah. Their shepherd. And he's shepherding them because they've partaken of this. They've been a beneficiary of Jehovah Jireh. And they're the redeemed remnant of Israel out there. And he's dealing with them as a shepherd, and he's leading them in everything. And they're seeing his deliverance, and they're seeing his avengement. And they're going to be beneficiaries of his kingship and be blessed by him. It's a psalm that sits in the middle of the book that deals with the focus on the redemption. And it shows the benefits the remnant gets from the redemption by being the redeemed of Israel. And I just say that to you. It has a bearing upon others. It's part and parcel of all this, but there's a lot more you need to understand before you ever even get to that. But I say it to you to underscore what's going on in the book of Psalms there. And before you ever got to Isaiah 9, you'd have gone over that doctrinally. We're doing a shortcut method here, and it's not the best way to do things, but it's the only way to do it. And if it whets your appetite to go back and say, man, I got to learn those things, great, that's what it should do. But the issue right now in the few minutes we have left here is that that's what the Davidic covenant's all about. The Davidic covenant is the central issue in that interlude of glorious blessing there. 2 Samuel 7, like I said, sits in the doctrinal position in the middle of all that. And it's the focal point. Everything leads up to it, everything trails away from it, everything focuses upon it. And that's why the interlude of blessing is there. Because God makes the covenant in the midst of that foretaste of that kingdom blessing out there, and in the midst of that grand display of his mercy and grace operating for Israel, he makes the covenant that sets forth the mechanics of how his Jehovah's and grace that they know they need is going to be put mechanically into effect for them. And it's by the Adonai Jehovah enfleshing himself in the line of the seed of David. And he becomes their Redeemer. He comes to become their Redeemer, Deliverer, Avenger, King, and Blesser. Okay. That's our quick survey of the interlude of glorious blessing from 1 Samuel 16 to 1 Kings chapter 12. You read that through. I don't mean to have to do it before next time, that you'd be holding off on this tape for quite some time. But everything we're going over, hopefully is giving you an opportunity to read things through with more comprehension and more understanding. Next lesson, lesson 13, we'll begin the second course of punishment. And like I said, every lesson from now on till we get to the 5th course, we'll just deal with one of those courses. Next lesson will deal with the second course of punishment. And you ought to at least note the things going on in 1 Kings chapter 11 and 12. And note the reality of that second course fit to get itself underway.